In 1941, on a foul, reeking swamp in Arlington, a construction project began that would forever redraw the map of the world. Thousands of workers, driven at a frantic, sleepless, non-stop pace, poured millions of tons of concrete into the bottomless mire. They were erecting not just an office, but a colossal concrete labyrinth. Thus was born the Pentagon, the largest administrative building on the planet, whose perfect five-sided shape to this day resembles a giant seal seared into the flesh of the earth. Architects created this concrete monolith in an atmosphere of strict secrecy and paranoia, as if anticipating the coming nightmare. The design was engineered with a perverted elegance. Endless, absolutely identical corridors spanning a total length of 28 kilometers were meant to paralyze a person's will. Within these monotonous walls, devoid of a single distinguishing feature, it is easy to lose all orientation in time and space. It is a perfect geometric trap where every turn feels like an optical illusion, and the drone of the lights makes you question your own sanity. The subterranean belly of this monster hid secrets that even high-ranking officials walking the upper floors every day never suspected. Deep underground, in damp, stifling bunkers, self-sustaining survival levels were built in preparation for a total catastrophe. The concrete walls permanently absorbed the creator's primal fear of the inevitable end of the world. This place was originally designed not for efficient management, but as an indestructible crypt for the elite, ready to outlast the destruction of the rest of humanity. With the onset of the Cold War in the 1950s, the atmosphere inside the Pentagon turned completely into a suffocating hell. The air here was constantly poisoned by thick cigarette smoke and the stench of burnt, cheap coffee. Top generals and military analysts did not step out into the fresh light for days, locked inside windowless offices. In this artificial twilight, beneath the unceasing rumble of primitive electronic computers, they cold-bloodedly calculated the trajectories of ballistic missiles capable of turning entire continents into radioactive ash. Paranoia became the official religion inside this enclosed concrete ring. People cleared for state secrets gradually transformed into hostages of their own fears and suspicions. Any unconventional action, any rustle in the ventilation was perceived as a direct threat to national security or the machinations of enemy spies. It was here, in the very heart of the American military machine, that a blind, fanatical readiness to destroy the entire world was born, all for the sake of victory in a mad mathematical simulation where human life cost less than the ink on staff maps. The most striking part was that behind all these titanic calculations and global conspiracies lay a sinister, almost mystical detail. The architectural blueprint demanded that from absolutely any point in this gigantic building, one could run to any other point in just 7 minutes. This turned the movement of officers into an eternal, feverish race in circles. They moved like rats in a maze, driven by the invisible whip of constantly anticipating a Soviet nuclear strike that was supposed to shatter this five-sided bastion into tiny fragments. When the construction fever subsided and the last trucks left the drained swamp, this five-sided bastion began to live a frightening life of its own. The 1950s arrived, and a chilling wave of the Cold War washed over the planet, turning the office building into the epicenter of a global psychosis. A perpetual twilight settled inside the concrete giant, where time lost its usual meaning. The air in the endless radial rings became so heavy and sticky with cigarette smoke that it felt as though paranoia itself had materialized in these blind, windowless corridors, causing people to choke under an invisible but palpable pressure. Every day, thousands of officials and officers descended into this belly of war, leaving the sunlight and the remnants of normal human life outside. Top generals became the masters of the domain, their faces turned into frozen masks from constant sleep deprivation and colossal responsibility. Locked in stifling offices beneath the unceasing rumble of primitive ventilation, they leaned over huge topographic maps for hours. In the dim light of desk lamps, these men cold-bloodedly mapped routes for bombers and calculated optimal trajectories for the first ballistic missiles capable of erasing entire nations from the face of the earth. The atmosphere inside the department was saturated with the sickening stench of burnt, cheap coffee, which replaced proper rest and food for the military personnel. Under this bitter aroma, the fates of billions of people, completely unaware of their doom, were decided in the silence of the offices. The mathematical precision with which staff officers calculated the destruction radiuses of thermonuclear warheads bordered on absolute madness. They operated with dry numbers that concealed blooming cities, turning the potential annihilation of human civilization into ordinary bureaucratic routine recorded on stamped paper. The most terrifying thing was the ease with which the human mind adapted to the thought of inevitable total destruction. In the suffocating half-darkness of briefing rooms, generals argued with icy calmness about acceptable losses, cold-bloodedly determining how many hundreds of millions of civilians would burn in the first 30 minutes of a global conflict. Living people in these calculations turned into a statistical error, into faceless units on weapon efficiency graphs. The fear of a Soviet atomic strike birthed a monstrous logic: to survive, one had to be the first to incinerate half of the globe. Inside the Pentagon, a special caste of people formed whose brains were completely warped by the atmosphere of perpetually awaiting the apocalypse. They forgot how to believe the news, suspecting a hidden trick or preparation for a treacherous attack in every diplomatic gesture. The walls of the building seemed to transmit this continuous impulse of anxiety directly into the consciousness of its inhabitants. Paranoia forced them to see enemy agents in the service staff, and any technical malfunction or communication glitch caused blood-curdling panic and an immediate readiness to sound the combat alert. This concrete monster, erected in just 16 months, completely subjugated the will of those who were supposed to protect the peace. Instead, they transformed into the architects of the planet's potential demise, trapped in the snare of their own apocalyptic fantasies. Spending weeks in isolation from the outside world, military strategists gradually lost touch with reality, starting to perceive the actual Earth as a giant chessboard for their final, suicidal game. And while spring replaced winter on the streets of Washington, the endless, nightmarish countdown of seconds until the beginning of the end continued behind the thick walls of the five-sided structure. The true heart of this concrete leviathan beat far beyond the visible world, deep beneath the foundations of the five-sided structure, where even the faintest beam of sunlight never penetrated. The primary and darkest secret of the gigantic complex was its epicenter, a deeply classified underground bunker hidden under layers of armored plates. In this isolated crypt, military analysts and communications operators transformed into true hostages of their own exaggerated paranoia. Cut off from the outside world by thick layers of earth and concrete, they spent weeks in an enclosed space where reality gradually dissolved, giving way to obsessive nightmares of an inevitable nuclear catastrophe. Due to the complete absence of natural light and the monotonous gray walls blending into an endless labyrinth 28 kilometers long, the human psyche inside the bunker began to rapidly deteriorate. Men wandered for hours through identical sectors, losing the ability to distinguish day from night and real threats from the fruits of their inflamed imaginations. The only sound filling this subterranean void was the unceasing, oppressive hum of the heavy ventilation system. This mechanical rustle slowly but surely drove the staff mad, eating into their consciousness and forcing them to see enemy conspiracies and hidden espionage in every random murmur or creak of a door. In the artificial, deathly pale twilight of the operations rooms, human life completely lost its sacred value, turning into faceless, dry statistics. The huge, glowing screens displayed not cities with their history and millions of residents, but merely population densities and radiuses of 100% flesh vaporization. Planning the complete annihilation of human civilization at these depths turned into the most ordinary, routine clerical work. Officers stamped orders for carpet bombings with the same indifference ordinary clerks used to sign invoices for office supplies, cold-bloodedly consigning entire megalopolises to oblivion. This deep isolation birthed a warped corporate culture where the primary measure of professionalism was absolute emotional deafness. Analysts competed to see who could erase the enemy's key industrial centers from the map of the world more efficiently and with fewer costs. The minds of these people, trapped in the underground snare, deformed under the weight of the terrifying secrets they had to process every second. Gradually, they began to perceive humanity as an unfortunate nuisance in the flawless mathematical equation of war, which they were obligated to solve at any cost, even if the price was the demise of the entire planet. Every shift in the subterranean epicenter turned into a grueling torture for the nervous system, where the slightest fluctuation of sensors could trigger the irreparable. The tension in the air was so palpable that the fingers of duty officers constantly trembled over control panels, ready at any moment to activate the protocols of retribution. The endless gray corridors sucked the remnants of empathy out of people, leaving in its place only a cold, calculating algorithm for the survival of the state machine. The bunker became a true death factory, where the scenario of a nuclear apocalypse was forged in real time, while its creators obediently awaited their turn to burn in the cleansing fire. The most sophisticated and truly terrifying element of this colossal defense system was its absolute, absurd level of isolation. At the very beginning of the design phase, top leadership forced the architects to take a mad step, to create a building shaped so that from absolutely any point inside, one could reach the opposite side in just 7 minutes. For the sake of this devilish logic, the space was tied into a tight knot of concentric rings, which turned the defense complex into a perfect trap for human consciousness. The speed of movement here was bought at the price of the complete destruction of familiar geometry, turning daily service into a waking nightmare. General staff officers and cryptographers spent hours wandering through these radial corridors, which coiled endlessly, erasing any sense of direction. The perpetual running in circles inside an enclosed concrete ring stripped people of their ability to adequately perceive reality, distorting time and space. Within these walls, there were no windows to the outside, and a person trapped inside the five-sided monster could not physically comprehend whether it was day or the dead of night. The minds of career military personnel slowly but irreversibly fractured under the monstrous pressure of the terrifying secrets they had to carry within themselves, without the right to share them even with their closest relatives. This architectural snare slowly purged the remnants of humanity from the souls of the staff, replacing them with cold calculation. Being constantly inside a closed circuit, where every person you met looked exactly like the previous one, birthed a persistent feeling that everything happening around was unreal. Classified analysts spent hours studying reports on the enemy's nuclear potential until their own thoughts turned into a mush of numbers, charts, and panic-stricken expectations. The identical gray doors of the offices slammed shut behind them like coffin lids, isolating them from the living world and locking them face-to-face with scenarios of global catastrophe. It was in these suffocating, endlessly looping corridors that a blind, fanatical readiness to push the red button at any moment and launch the flywheel of mutual destruction was born. This horrifying urge was not dictated at all by ideological hatred toward the distant Soviet enemy, nor by a thirst for geopolitical victory. It was pure, primal, animal madness, born of years of exhausting anticipation of an inevitable counterstrike. The military psyche simply could not withstand being perpetually in the position of a cocked trigger, and the destruction of the inhabited planet seemed to them the only way to end this endless nightmare. Every step along the infinite rings brought the officers closer to a mental brink where the concepts of good and evil were completely erased. The concrete labyrinth of paranoia acted as a gigantic resonator of fear, amplifying every anxious thought to the scale of a universal catastrophe. People trapped within a 7-minute reach of any department stewed in their own juices of secret directives and panicky intelligence reports. They transformed into faceless cogs of a mechanism that had been created for war, and this mechanism desperately demanded its logical conclusion, even if the price of that finale meant the complete and irreversible vaporization of human civilization. While inside the concrete Pentagon, officers were slowly losing their minds to isolation, high above their heads, in the icy void of space, another part of this global psychosis was unfolding. For long decades, Soviet spy satellites equipped with the most powerful optics continuously recorded every square meter of the sinister complex in Arlington. The foreign intelligence analysts' particular, almost mystical attention was drawn to a tiny inner courtyard, hidden from the outside world and located at the exact geometric center of the colossal building. From space, this patch of land looked like the core of a giant citadel, and it was right there that something was happening which caused the top leadership of the opposing superpower to shudder. Every day, at strictly designated hours, satellite imaging captured the same frightening picture: hundreds of military personnel, including top generals and tactical-level officers, feverishly flocked into this central courtyard. They moved in dense streams from different wings of the building, as if obeying an invisible signal, and gathered in long, tense lines at the center of the square. From the outside, this collective action looked like a dark, meticulously rehearsed secret ritual whose participants arrived to receive their final orders. Secret analysts across the ocean spent weeks decoding these images, trying to comprehend what sinister force compelled the command of the American military to abandon their workstations all at once. As a result of these long years of observation, foreign intelligence arrived at an unambiguous and blood-chilling conclusion. They were absolutely certain that beneath this mysterious, heavily guarded patch of land, in the very heart of the Pentagon, lay hidden the most important, top-secret underground command bunker. In the minds of the enemy's strategic analysts, this was the central communications hub from which the encrypted directives to launch World War III would be issued. The logic seemed flawless. An object of such importance simply had to be at the epicenter of this geometric anomaly, protected by millions of tons of reinforced concrete and under the constant personal supervision of the brass. Based on this ironclad but completely false certainty, the Soviet military leadership made the only strategic decision that made sense to them. The coordinates of this tiny inner courtyard were immediately programmed into the flight plans of hundreds of ballistic missiles carrying thermonuclear warheads of colossal power. The doomsday weapons, capable of instantly vaporizing half of the American continent, were aimed with an accuracy of down to a single meter at this exact central point. The greatest minds of the defense complex kept their fingers on the trigger for decades, ready in the very first seconds of a global conflict to deliver a crushing blow into the heart of the American military machine, completely erasing the mysterious bunker from the face of the earth. Official historians and government biographers still shamefully withhold the devastating truth that turns the greatest confrontation in human history into an absurd farce. The very same mysterious epicenter that held the entire planet in chilling fear and condemned billions of lives to potential incineration had, in reality, absolutely nothing to do with high technology or secret codes. The classified facility, for the destruction of which intercontinental ballistic missile crews remained on round-the-clock alert across the ocean, turned out to be an ordinary, nondescript hot dog stand. It was right there, driven by hunger and nervous exhaustion, that high-ranking generals and strategists ran to buy hot dogs during short breaks between planning massive nuclear strikes. The greatest minds of two competing superpowers spent decades balancing on the razor-thin edge of the total annihilation of human civilization, plunged into the abyss of their own paranoia. At the exact same time, the Soviet military command continued to hold an ordinary outlet selling cheap American fast food dead in the crosshairs of their most powerful thermonuclear warheads. The coordinates of a stand selling sausages and mustard, hidden in the very heart of this dark, five-sided labyrinth, were hard-coded into the onboard computers of doomsday nuclear weapons as priority target number one. Foreign intelligence fell victim to its own warped logic, mistaking the mundane snacking of American military officials for the ultimate ritual of controlling Judgment Day. A full-scale nuclear apocalypse capable of turning the inhabited planet into a lifeless, radioactive wasteland very nearly began because of a monstrous misunderstanding hidden behind thick concrete walls. The true heart of the American military machine, which was under continuous surveillance from space, was a modest pavilion that smelled of grilled meat and onions rather than the dampness of secret bunkers. This ridiculous point on the map of the Pentagon personifies the entire horror of the Cold War, where the fate of civilization depended on mad coincidences and false interpretations. The world survived by mere miracle while missile base operators clenched their sweaty fingers onto launch buttons, aiming directly at a street food counter.